Okay, we're back after our break. We're going to continue on. We welcome Ann and Parth from Finance to talk to us about general fund budget, 5-year plan, bring us kind of up to speed over where we are and where we're going and all those good things. So,
Okay.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm looking forward to a productive day of discussing the county's finances and future plans. Feel free to ask questions. If I don't know the answer off the top of my head, I'll be sure to, Parth will make a note and we'll get you the information you need. Can you go to the next slide? Can you go to the next slide? We're going to talk today, I want to give you a little bit of history of our financial awards and ratings. We're going to talk a little about the current year overview, and then a review of next year, and then we'll talk about those 5-year plans, because there's so many things before us. We tried to prepare a lot of scenarios because there's a lot of different options, and they are just scenarios and plans that are totally subject. We fully expect them to change. Next one. Let's talk a little bit about our awards. The GFOA, which is the Government Finance Officers Association, has recognized our audit for the last 28 years. And in order to get that, you have to submit your audit, and it has to be deemed proficient based on its organization, that it satisfies GAAP and legal requirements, and it's a big deal. You know, there are thousands and thousands of governments in this country, and only about 1,200 even submit for the award. So that is a very, very distinguished award, which the county has consistently received. And that gives you something from an external agency that says how we're doing. Of course, in addition, we have our auditors, and we've received clean opinions all those years as well from our external CPAs. Also, our budget document, they just started having that a little bit later. That's why it's not 28 years too, probably. For 15 years, we've received the budget, the budget award. And in order to get that award from the same organization, the GFOA, you have to submit your budget, and they have to deem that it's proficient as a policy document, as a financial plan, as an operations guide, and as a communications device. So it's more than just, a small thing. In fact, this is what it looks like when it's actually finally printed. And so it is a whole lot of work and a lot of effort on a lot of people's part that go into that. And I'm just very proud of Cabarrus County and the things that they've done to achieve those awards for the last 15 years. So I feel like we've been blessed with strong financial management for many years, as evidenced by these external raters of our expertise. The next external agency that rates Cabarrus County is the ratings agencies, Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch. And we get those ratings generally when we are doing our debt. What that does is the better your rating, the lower your interest cost, because what they're rating you as a credit risk. And so when they think that you are a really good credit risk, in other words, they think you're going to pay your money back, you get a lower interest rate. And so those ratings are very, very important. In 2003, what I've done is I've taken some excerpts from what these rating agencies have said. In 2003, they said we had sound financial operations characterized by strong fund balances. We received a stable outlook on our rating, reflecting the expectation of the county's continued strong fiscal operations. In 2005, narrowing county reserves caused some concerns for reduced flexibility in the county's financial position, and we received a negative outlook from one of the ratings agencies. Next, 2006, we received an upgraded bond rating. The county initiated a policy addition that the budget was going to be crafted so that recurring operating revenues match recurring expenses, and any fund balance in excess of the 15% requirement will be transferred to the capital reserve for pay-as-you-go capital projects. Later on in the presentation, I will have a slide that shows our pay-as-you-go financing over the last years. Also in '06, S&P's comment was Cabarrus County's strong bond rating is indicative of the county's sound economy and conservative budgeting practices. Then in 2008, once again, they said that we reflected strong financial performance and healthy reserve position. Management practices were considered strong, well-embedded, and sustainable. We received an upgrade from AA to AA+, which is one step away from AAA. Then our latest ratings were last year, 2013, and we maintained that AA+ rating, and their comments said their rating reflected the county's solid financial position that has been bolstered by new management policies and a manageable debt burden. And then S&P noted that we continue to view the county's financial management practices as strong, well-embedded, and likely sustainable. So our goal is to manage the county finances in such a way as to maintain that AA+ rating and to stay right up there in good graces with all of our raters. Now let's talk a little bit about where we are this year. Collections on our real taxes. For the first 6 months of 2014, we've collected 78% of the budget on real and 51.6% on DMV. And if you look at the same time last year, we were at the exact same place on real, but at 46% on DMV. So I do think the change to VTS is showing a higher collection percentage, as Brent was noticing earlier. The budget for fiscal 2014 for our property taxes is $134,116,000. The projection based on the first 6 months is that we'll bring in around $134,750. So that puts us about $630,000 over budget. So that's good. We want it to be over, but not millions over. And so I feel like we're in pretty good shape on the property taxes. Let's talk about delinquent taxes. The first 6 months of the year, we've collected $1.98 million against a budget of $2.92 million, so we're at 68%, so that's good. We are definitely more than on track. We're doing well, just not as well as the prior year. Last year, we had a large settlement where over $1 million, $1.1 million was paid in November on one particular delinquent account, and so that put us, at this point last year, we already had $1 million in excess of the budget. So we were at 155% of the budget. So we're not as good as last year, but we're on track to do a good job. Those things are going to vary depending on what's out there to collect that's delinquent. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about property values. Discoveries, and discoveries on real properties, that's the unlisted improvement to properties. The first 6 months of this year, we had values of $16 million added. The first 6 months of last year, we had $88 million added. So we didn't have as much discoveries, but that also indicates you did a pretty good job of getting things that going through the channels and being listed. Then the subtractions to the valuations are the abatements on the real property. Those are reductions or elimination due to appeals or things like that. The first 6 months of this year, it was $74.8 million. First 6 months of last year was $149 million. So although we didn't have as many discoveries to add, we didn't have as many abatements to subtract from what we had. Sales taxes. Now this is the real, I find it the most difficult for us to estimate. We were rolling right along really good, right on schedule, and then when our payment came in January for our November sales taxes, it's normally about $2.7 million, and when it came, it was $180,000. So immediately, I'm on the phone to the state saying, "What's wrong with my money?" And they said, "Well, you had $5.1 million in refunds to nonprofits that hit for the month of November," and so that was a real shocker, and that changed the outlook from what we had. The budget for sales tax for 2014 is $35.5 million. For the first 5 months of the year, we've received $12.9 million. And so I talked with the state. I said, well, are there more of these refunds in the pipeline? And that's considered proprietary information. They say they can't tell us these things. It makes our job so much harder. And so I said, well, what if I took my first 4 months, which seemed to be normal, my 5th month, which was not normal, but put that in the calculation, and then assume that the next 7 months would be the average of the first 4 months. And she said that would be a very wise way to do it. So that's how I did the calculation. And when you do it that way, we may come up 277 less than the budget this year. So, we were over on the property. We may be under on the sales. Now, lots of things can happen, the December information from the Christmas sales. And I asked her, do you have any information? Nope, have nothing. So, I just want you to understand what a difficult job it is. And finance directors across the state all agree that this is the hardest part of when you're trying to budget is the sales taxes.
And also, Amazon is supposed to start February 1st collecting sales tax for the state of North Carolina.
Yes.
So that could offset a little bit.
That could help. And then the whole new tax structure started January 1st, where they are now taxing like movie tickets, and it dawned on us that would probably mean race tickets. And so there's a whole different rule in play. And I asked them at the state, do you have any projections to help me? No. So we're doing the best we can. So hopefully over the next 6 months, we'll get an idea of what broadening the base has done. And that will help us as we go through our budget process. But I'll be watching sales taxes every month as we get our information. And
do you historically see much bigger Decembers than every other month in terms of sales tax returns?
Well, December's would come in February.
Right.
And I would assume yes.
Yeah.
I haven't looked at it each month, but I would assume that was a bigger one.
Yeah.
But you never know when they're going to offset a good month with refunds. And so it's like we get a net number, so sales could have been good, but if the refunds hit that month, then it really changes and skews the data. The other major fees that we always take a look at, the Register of Deeds, we looks like we might be 265 over budget. And building inspections, $110,000, and ambulance, another $110,000. And all of those are after we increase the budget significantly from the year before. So these are some good, strong numbers. The projections indicate that the fees collected will slightly outpace the amount budgeted, which is good. Anytime you raise it, you want to make sure, did I raise it and did it happen? And it looks like it did. And so we're pleased with that. These are projections. Things could change, but that's what it looks like right now. Okay, this is a chart that shows what our expense budget looks like. And if you'll notice that big chunk on the left is education, includes operation, capital, and debt service, and that's 43% of our budget. The next largest is down there in the blue, the human services, which is 19%. Third is public safety at 15%. So this just gives you an idea of the various sections of our budget. If you'll notice at the very top, I believe in green, it's the non-school debt service, which is 5% of our budget. Then this chart shows you by category. How much is personnel, which is 28%, how much is operations, which is 70%, and how much is capital, which is only 2% of our budget. Okay, as we look at this year, the salaries, that's always a place we look. The position vacancy, we have salary vacancy, which is basically positions come and go during the year. And somebody leaves and it takes a while to get that position recruited and rehired, so you have a lapse there. When we start a new budget year and someone has a new position, it takes them a while to get that position and get them on board. And so that creates this salary vacancy. And I'm estimating that to be $1 to $1.5 million. And I know we've worked really hard over the years to try to get that down, and we're going to continue to try to refine those projections to try to get those closer. The health care plan. We've had major plan changes in the last 2 years. And as you know, we are self-insured. We've implemented some cost avoidance by changing planned coverages. And last year, fiscal 14 was our baseline year for our implementing accountability improvement measures, AIM. And what that relates to is we had 4 measures that were deemed important for wellness. And so everybody had to participate. Well, you were supposed to participate. If you didn't participate, you had to pay extra for your health insurance. But you had to pass 3 of the 4 criteria. And so that sets your baseline. And then this coming year, in fiscal 15, we will actually implement it and say, okay, are you still passing 3 or 4? Or have you made a certain level of improvement on each of those? And there's different scales for those. But basically, it's requiring that increased individual responsibility for their health and for maintaining their health and controlling the overall cost. Unemployment. This was the fiscal 14 has been the year where we got the double whammy. We had to prepay, but making quarterly payments to accumulate a reserve at the state, and then in addition, pay our annual bill. And so you will see this year we had extra money in the budget to cover that double whammy. Next year it will, of course, come out. And it's too soon to tell the final cost. They made changes whereby we get a bill, we can no longer appeal decisions. However, the state did make changes in the maximum unemployment that you could get and the maximum amount of time you could get it. So there's a lot of different laws and rules changing, and it's just too soon to tell the final cost. So we're watching that one closely as well. So in summary, the tax revenues seem on track. We are monitoring those sales tax and monitoring in order to monitor the refunds as well as the state tax structure and like Commissioner Poole said, the new change with Amazon, which is effective February 1, they will be charging it. I believe 19 other states they were doing it for, and now North Carolina has joined that, and perhaps the other internet. I would like, what's good for one's good for all. So I'm hoping that will continue to grow. The fee revenues, right now, they indicate that we will be okay and slightly outpace our budget, so that's a good thing. Now let's talk about the expenses. We're looking at our expenses, where we are this year. Now, all the debt and education will be paid per the budget. There's never any difference there. We can budget what we have agreed to pay to the penny on that. We do have a contingency out there of $1.2 million in this calculation, where I'm saying I think we'll have about $3.5 million left. I'm assuming we don't use any of that contingency. That may change, of course, but right now that's what's there, and I included that in my estimated savings. We've talked about the salary vacancy of $1 to $1.2 million, which is basically about 2% on the personnel budget. Power. At the time we did the budget, Duke had announced increased rates expectation. I don't think they came as much as expected, so right now we're looking like we might have $400,000 in that category of savings. Human services, and that's a hard one because when you don't have the expense, often you don't have the revenue either. And so we're looking at maybe $225 that we might come in under on the expense, but depending on the percentage of reimbursement, that would hit our revenues as well. Purchase services, it looks like we might have $185,000. The biggest piece of that is the jail with $100,000 in savings in a particular category there. We had some we thought we would save in child welfare of about $35,000, tax administration about $15,000, tax collector $35,000, and the jail $100,000. So that's where we're thinking we might have some savings on purchase services. Fuel. At the time we do budgets for fuel, we don't know what the gas rate's going to be for the year, but we've had a good year, and so I'm anticipating that we'll have $175,000 left over in fuel. The primarily detention food service, they're doing a really good job of saving us money over at the detention center on our food, and we think we'll come in under budget $135,000 there. And then there were other service contracts for about $75,000, and most of those relate to building maintenance type contracts. So when you add it all up, it's about $3.5 million. And of course, it may come in more than that, it may come in less than that, but right now the crystal ball seems to be saying that might be the number. Any questions so far? All right, let's talk about 15. There's the budget calendar so that you can kind of get aware of what all's going on. It starts with today, with this planning retreat where you give us our marching orders on the budget. And so I'm looking forward to getting that. And then starting Monday through February 14th, the county manager and department heads and finance staff are going to be having budget conferences with every department regarding performance. Part's going to talk to you in a little bit about our new logic model and some of the trainings and analyses and discussions we've had. And basically that's going to be talking about performance and setting the expectations for performance and performance measures. Then starting in March 17th through the 31st, those same groups will be working on operating budgets. So we've kind of separated performance and the dollar parts because it seemed like when we had them all in one meeting, the meeting got too long and neither side got their due discussion. And so now we're going to devote the entire meeting to one and then the other so that each gets their due diligence. Then in April and May, the county manager and the finance staff will be compiling all the various information. And then May 19th, the county manager will have a recommended budget to you as a board. And then y'all start looking at it in May, 27th through the 29th. We will be having budget workshops whereby each department will be coming before you and explaining and being able to answer any questions you have. And we'll go through quite a diligent process there. And then we're hoping on June 16th, which is your normal meeting, that we can adopt our budget. The law says we have to have it by June 30th, but we hope to have it on June 16th. I'm going to let Parth come tell you about the new trainings that he's done and the logic model. And
thank you, Ann. Hello.
are you on?
It doesn't seem. Okay, there it is. Thank you, Ann, and good morning, commissioners. Really what I wanted to start off with, and it's not on the slide, is that over the past few years, the county manager and deputy county managers have been leading departments in trying to make our performance management process or performance measurement process more robust. There has been quite a lot of improvement over the past many years, and I'm just trying to basically put a little bit more on it. What you see here is a logic model, and you have inputs, activities, outputs, purpose, and goal on the left-hand side. Essentially, what an input is saying is, what does it take to complete an activity? By doing that activity, it produces some immediate results. Something happens. By that thing happening, you have a general purpose that you're trying to achieve, and after achieving that purpose, you have some sort of goal. So it's essentially trying to give a story to what a department does. That's what the program summary sheets have always done, and we're just trying to paint it out a little bit better. You can see how in the last maybe 5-10 years, how things are becoming more, hey, just tell me what you do in 30 seconds. There's a finite amount of time, finite amount of resources, and this is an effort to be able to tell a department story a lot faster. Also, then, as you move to the right, you have indicators, which essentially quantifies each of those categories, and then you have assumptions, which justifies those indicators. So essentially, if you see a performance measure, let's say, going up, down, you can look to the assumption and say, oh, well, if maybe we put more money into this particular department, we can control that performance and have it at a higher performance. Or if we re-strategized, or if we could maybe get a handle on the economy. Obviously, some of these things are well beyond our control. They're external threats, let's say from a SWOT analysis, a strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats analysis. That might be a threat whenever you look at the economy. But this allows it to flesh it out, and for everyone, the public, for yourselves, and even departments and leadership to understand, okay, where a department is coming from. And of course, it's still in progress. We are working it out. We're going to be having these meetings, but it's probably going to take, a little more time, probably a couple of years to really get it right. And so, we hope that you can be patient with us, but at the same time, do ask questions. And we do want to have you look at the program summary sheets. I'm sure you always have, but even look at them more carefully, so that way you get a better idea of what departments are doing, how they're doing it, and at the end of the day, are they doing what, that mission statement is essentially saying. To give you an example of what a logic model looks like when it's completely fleshed out, this is not specific to any one of our departments, but this is a very easy example to understand. This is looking at a jail literacy program. So you have some activities there in the very bottom left corner where you provide books and materials and you conduct training sessions. As you move up, by doing that, you improve literacy among participants. The purpose then is for former inmates to be able to find employment. And finally, you have a safer society and reduce costs through recidivism. As you move to the right, let's just start at the bottom. You have so many number of books, so many hours of sessions, and then you have some of those numbers. And the assumptions and risks say sufficient staffing and inmates actively participate. Without you having sufficient staffing, without the inmates participating, you really can't get those numbers, you really can't do those activities as well as you'd like. So that's essentially the story we're trying to relay. All the information's always been there, we're just trying to package it slightly differently to make it a little bit more, tangible maybe. It doesn't seem like it right now, but I think in time it will. The lead up to all of this was several sessions, one on mission statements, two on SWOT analysis, and the last session was on logic model. So we really just tried to work with departments to get a better understanding of, where all of this is coming from, because a lot of times it may seem like, hey, this is just being thrown on us, and this is really the background. What we're really trying to get is how well can you tell your story, because it's really important, because with being in public service, there's a reason why we get into this profession, and this really kind of connects you to the higher end goal, which is giving that higher quality of life to the citizens of Cabarrus County.
This is an evolving process, as Parth said, but this is the next step in us to be able to not only evaluate a program or service financially, but are they meeting their goals? Are they performing a service that is still relevant to the community? Is it still relevant to your goals and objectives? And if not, why? Is there something that we can do to make it meet those goals? And if we don't feel that there is something, then why are we doing it? And then that's when we would make that decision and bring it to you guys. Okay, let's just do away with that. There's funds there. Do we move those funds somewhere else, or do we just pull those funds back? So.
I'm going to let Ann take over for the rest of the presentation. She's going to go back to the overview of next year, beginning with the revenues.
Go back to that model.
Sure.
Because that is a different thing.
Thanks.
To help you, it starts at the bottom left-hand corner. Most time when we see something, we want to start at the top again. If you'll start at the bottom left-hand corner and go up, that's how this one flows. So you kind of start with the base and then get to the higher goals at the top. And that makes the reading make a lot more sense.
Thanks.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about fiscal 15. Currently, the tax rate is 70 cents. The collection rate is 97.29% on real and 89.19% on DMV. And like I said, I'm expecting that 89.19 to go up by, I believe in the 5-year plan, I estimated an additional 5%, which is $470,000. The valuation amount, which Brent gave you this morning, and I've got the exact same number, $19,384,944, which is up to 0.41% from what we were using last year. By the way, those collection rates, that's what we are bound to in terms of when we are budgeting. We cannot budget at a higher collection rate than we actually did the previous fiscal year. Sales tax. And this one was a hard one. I estimated an increase of 2.25% over this current year's budget. The national trend is 3% growth. We've had the state tax reform that was broadening the base. We will continue to revise our forecast, but when right now it looks like I might be 277 below, I didn't want to go to 3, and not knowing all of the effects of the changes, I'm hoping 2.25 will be close, but we will continue to monitor that because I think that's the hardest thing for us to anticipate. In our major fees, Register of Deeds, we are anticipating a 15% increase over the 14 budget. You know, like I showed you earlier, how we're coming in over. So we're estimating, okay, let's go ahead and we're comfortable budgeting that much more for Register of Deeds, 5% more on building inspections, and 2% more on ambulances. Now let's look at the expenses. The COLA, the personnel ordinance includes a cost of living analysis, allowance. The adjustments are made at the beginning of each fiscal year based on the CPI. The CPI came out, I believe, last Friday. And so, according to our policy, which is that we will increase for the previous calendar year rounded down to the nearest 0.5%. So that would put us at 1.5% on our COLA. That would cost $755,000 with all the fringes included. You know, that changes FICA, Medicare, insurance and bonds, retirement, and 401k. The merits. Personnel ordinance includes a merit system for pay increases for meritorious service of employees. We've analyzed the distribution of merits based on fiscal 14 so far. We had 400 employees that we had evaluation scores so far, and the scores on average would equate to a 1.25% merit. And then I've got a chart. Bart's done a great chart here, on the range of merit increases based on 14 performance. So although the range goes from 0 to 2.5%, only 17 people in this group got 2.5. But the largest group got 1% at 106 people. The next got 1.5 at 101, but 39 got nothing.
You're looking at 5 of those.
You're looking at so we were pleased to see a bell curve. Sometimes I've been places where the merits, people were abusing the system and were overrating people. That is certainly not the case here. We have a nice bell curve there.
I've got a question for you. And with the merit pay, or Mike, you said that was based on 400 employees? Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how does the evaluations work? Is it, does every employee get an evaluation every year?
Yes.
What's the process?
Okay. But basically around your anniversary date, which is why in 6 months you would assume, you know, people come in about the same each month. So that's why we have to extrapolate this. You look at the next slide, we assumed, okay, what if the same percentages apply? There's 882 staff that should have evaluations in a given year.
Okay, that's why I was curious about the 400 number.
That's for the first
First
6
six,
months, and that's what we have data on.
Right.
And so we took that data and assumed, okay, if the first 400 had
I
this
see.
distribution, what'll the next 482 do? And we assumed the same distribution.
Okay, I understand that. Now, also, how does that work with, for instance, like cooperative extension, where it's a shared position? Do they receive
They
reviews
do
from the
have
county and the
evaluations. Jonathan will sit in on those evaluations of the director,
state? Okay,
and then everybody else underneath the director would evaluate, but we do not have a say-so in the final percentage increase in that.
okay.
That's up
So
to the state.
okay, so do they receive merit pay from the county then? If they are reviewed by the state, do we?
Their payroll is run through the state. We just
Right.
pay a portion of their salary. So
Right.
the state manages what their raises are and gives them to them, and we just pay our share.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, our agreement with them is that we pay that
Right.
portion. If they give the merit increase, then we match it.
Right, okay, that's what I was curious.
proportion.
I knew it was run through the state, but I was wondering if, we had any authority in there.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, this slide shows, once you do the extrapolation of the 800, and come up with 882 positions that do qualify for a merit, what it would cost in both salary and fringe, and the total was $544,000. Healthcare. We've done really well with our health care. These increases anticipated of $210,000 relate to the Affordable Care Act fees and some plan design changes that we needed to do because of the Affordable Care Act. We are having to change in fiscal 15 the medical copay in terms of whether it applies to the deductible or not. And then in fiscal 16, the pharmacy copay will apply towards the deductible. So those are changes we have to do. Also in fiscal 15, that will be the implementation of those fees, where if people do not pass 3 of the 4, make the improvement, then they have to pay $50 a month more for their health insurance. So that will be an impact in fiscal 15. If you did not participate in the AIM, doing the measures, you're paying it now. If you did participate but you didn't pass, then coming up this year you will have to pay that extra $50. Okay, unemployment, we've talked about how we're going to reduce that $220,000 in the fiscal 15 budget. We will be getting that annual bill to true up. We have to keep, the whole point was to get the cash on the side of the state, because they're the ones that pay the bill to the Fed. And so we paid those 4 prepayment quarters, and then we have to true up so that we always have a balance with the state equal to 1% of our taxable what is it they call that? The tax base per year. And it's the maximum per person goes up $5 as well. This year it was $214. This year it was $209. Next year it's $214 per person per year. Schools. I know we're going to talk a lot this afternoon about schools. In this first bullet, the 1.5% salary increase per the CCS resolution, if approved, it would cost for Cabarrus County Schools $2.9 million, Kannapolis City Schools $388,000. So the total would be $3,323,579. And you will see that in some of the 5-year plans. Here's the slide I was telling you was coming on the historical funding of the capital projects and maintenance. You'll see where we've got various facilities for schools and the community college from 95 to the present. We had $437 million in debt and $79.7 million in cash for the cost of $517 million. Facilities for the county from 2002 to the present. The debt was $118 million, cash $25 million, total cost of $144 million. Capital improvement plan for the schools, RCC, and the county 205 to the present was $58 million in cash. And it's the only category. And then we funded some one-time projects for the schools, RCC, and the county last year of $3.7 million, all cash. So when you total them up, of the $723.9 million, $167 million was cash, which is 23%. So it does show a history of pay-as-you-go funding for 23% of our project, 23% of the cost of our projects.
And you may not have the answer to this, but one of the things that I've noticed in terms of looking back at our debt is it has increased pretty dramatically in the last 20 years. During this time period that you mentioned, obviously $437 million. Do you know what our ratio looks like for maybe the 10 or 20 years before that? Is it 76.9%?
I don't know.
I didn't mean to. That would require a lot of history, so I didn't mean to stump you on that. I'm sorry.
Honestly,
it wasn't.
I'm not sure what records we actually have in detail to be able to go back that far. This is the information that we had accumulated because we have been keeping records for school construction since 1995, and we put all of our information and went forward with that. But we'd be limited to what we can go back. As far
That's
as
okay.
details
I was
are
just curious
concerned.
if anybody had knowledge about that, but it was a difficult question, and I didn't mean to put you on the
That's
spot.
okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
You'd have to be a historian of county finance to know that off the top of your head.
The next slide's about our fund balance. If you remember when we presented the audit, or it was presented, the fund balance, the total fund balance on June 30th is $95,739,000. You've already appropriated in the reappropriations in August of September, $4.1 million, and that was basically largely amounts for the schools and other organizations that couldn't spend it all at that period of time, but they had their plans, and we were carrying it over to get the next year. Then there's the category called non-spendable, which is your inventories and prepaid items. So that's not cash. And then we have fund balance that is restricted, which is reserved by state statute, which is primarily your receivables of about $11,400,000. Then we had some assignments. That first assignment is for extraordinary circumstances, the $5 million. And just like we had an example with the sales tax, what if that did not rectify itself? And there could be any number of things that could happen that we would need some type of reserve for that. The next one is the pending and potential claims, $8.6 million. And that one we are using right now to fulfill those claims. The tax appeals Brent referred to earlier, the $4.4 million, and hopefully after those things get determined, we can reduce that to what he deems will be reasonable after these things. The landfill post-closure cost, we are required to keep a reserve for that, so we have that assignment. And then our policy says that 15% of our budget will be assigned for working capital, which is $32 million. So what that makes in terms of available for transfer to the capital reserve fund is $29,486,500, which depending on what you do here today, would probably be coming before you in February to make that transfer. Should you make decisions today or before that meeting in February, that will change that amount. We have discussed using it for schools. It would also be available for our CIP needs of the county as well. We're working on the CIP budget right now. Some of the things in the county CIP budget that you may want to know are the EMS at Harrisburg, the radio replacements for the sheriff, and there's RCC has some cosmetology, CNA, paramedic facility needs. So those are some of the things that we are discussing in our CIP currently.
And on this slide here, this $5 million extraordinary circumstances fund is a brand-new fund, is that right?
This was an assignment that was put on the financials for the June 30th. So it was the June 30 financials were the first time it was put on.
Right, so for this year. And that can be anything that we decide it to be, correct?
Yes, it can.
And so we could potentially allocate some of that money for school construction as well?
It's up to your discretion.
Yeah. And then also, if our budget comes down some, this 15% reserve will come down also, correct?
Yes, that is a calculation straight off the budget.
Thank you.
Whatever the total budget is, 15% of that.
And historically, we have, the money over 15% has gone into the capital reserve, but we chose during the recession, with all the unknowns, not to move the money. So
Exactly.
Normally, in other previous times before that decision, it would have automatically gone into where you have available for transfer to capital reserve fund. It would have
Right.
already been in capital reserve fund. And once
Exactly.
we put it in there, that's what it's used for, and you can't take it out for something else.
Exactly. During the recession, you were very wise in that once you moved that over, you lost your flexibility. And so the board at the time said, let's keep our flexibility. It's money, it's earning interest. There's really no difference except for it's a one-way street into that capital reserve fund. And so you wanted to maintain your flexibility, which the rating agencies looked very positively at. And it took several years to build up this amount. I think in an earlier presentation I showed you how it had been over a period of time. But I think now we were saying, okay, we'll move it over, and then the cushion is the $5 million. Because if we dip below our that, we didn't have the $5 million, and we didn't have an assignment, and we had something negative, then technically you would have violated your policy of having that there. So we wanted to have a cushion to make sure we never violated our policy, because that's a real no-no with the raters.
Yeah, we don't want to do that. And I just remember, we had a lot of discussion at that time over what we should do, because there were so many uncertainties. And it was always the idea that things would get better. We just didn't know how long it would take. And that when things got better, we would do just that. We would put it
Right.
over into capital reserve and
Right.
continue paying cash for projects. But yeah, you don't want to dip below that 15% or, mess up our policies. Do you want to add?
Yeah, I just
something?
want, two questions. I think, Commissioner, strike to your first question, what did the debt ratio, cash to debt, prior to 95? Not knowing the exact numbers, but I would guess that it was higher cash versus debt, simply because we weren't building schools and we didn't have the frequency of needing to build these large, so we were able to use cash more often. However, from 95 or the early 90s to now, we built a tremendous amount of schools, and they were on a fast track, so the cash was not there. So you had to take on that debt in order to meet the demands of that growth. So just historically, I would imagine that, without the numbers. So in reference to the $5 million, yeah, this was the first year. What we have started doing in the last couple of years is some of these, especially in human services, foster care for one, instead of budgeting a larger number in the general fund budget, we kept it, we tried to be conservative there, with a cushion over in the fund balance should you move it in. Therefore, they kept the general fund budget down. The $5 million's there. We intend to move more of those type contingencies over there as well as we start looking at more of them during this budget cycle. The problem is going to be is if you take the $5 million or all of it and use it for capital, whether it's schools or county or whatever, if you spend that $5 million out of the fund, then that's going to reduce that cushion you have as a board. Should we need to go get that to, if I'm just using foster care, if we budget for 85 children and we realize 105, then we've got to go get that. And if you as a board decide to take a large portion or all of it, of that $5 million, your cushion in your fund balance, then it's going to maybe require you to have to dip into that 15%. And that's our concern, and that's why it's there. So
I think it's tremendously wise, Mike. I agree with this contingency. I think it's a much better way to budget for us because it allows us to actually keep a lower, it allows our budget to be a little bit lower and a little bit more accurate in terms of actual expenditures. I would not take all of it. I think maybe $1 million or $2 million or something like that we would look at. But just so you know, we were talking about different ways to fund schools, and,
Sure.
and there's a little bit there, and I like to look at a little bit when we can.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'll ask, since this is the first year that this $5 million has been budgeted for extraordinary circumstances, how often historically have we had a situation, that has required that amount of cash? Now, I know, of course, we have, a situation that may require, tens of thousands or even, hundreds of thousands, but how often, or historically, has there ever been a situation where we, needed $3 million for an extraordinary circumstance?
We haven't had an example of having to need a large amount of money, but
Right.
I just have been informed that we just potentially have another lawsuit out here, and we may need $2 million of it, so.
Okay. That's the
It
first
could
I've heard
happen
of
that
so-
quick.
Right, and I realize
And
that.
it's
I'm
not,
just-
and like Mr. Downs explained to you, utilizing it for daycare, foster care, or anything like that, yeah, those are probably the exceptions to the rules. But one lawsuit, that's what that $5 million is going to help us cover. What we did to build ourselves up to this point was we went and found everything that we could possibly think of and placed everything in there to have an assignment for it.
Right.
And we're starting to relieve those things. And we felt like if we left $5 million in there, anything within the near future that came up, we would have money to cover it. So in a situation where a lawsuit gets regenerated and we need that money,
Right. Yeah,
then
I
we're
mean,
gonna
I
take a big
certainly
chunk out of it.
understand. I mean, I understand the purpose of it, and I understand, why it's created. I was just asking, historically.
but I mean, I was
completely understand.
kind of
Yeah.
taken aback from that this morning, so.
Right.
We may, I was just trying to talk to Mike a little bit on the side, what we may do when we get done today is do a 5-minute closed session. Literally, I think they were as surprised as it hadn't had a chance to share it with anybody, but literally after we were here and the meeting had started, got word of something, so, and Rich isn't here yet. So we may do a brief closed session at the end of the meeting today, and then we'll be able to share, and hopefully know more.
And there's always, hopefully it never happens. Commissioner Meesmer is a natural disaster, a storm, or something like when the water or the plumbing burst over in the courthouse and the entire first floor is flooded. Luckily, we were able to absorb most of that through either insurance or not, but sometimes there may be that rainy day that, or another, who knows, that we're not able to absorb it within our budgets, that we may have to borrow,
Right.
or not borrow, but use that, so.
Right. And like I said, I completely understand
Yeah.
why it was created for those situations. I was just asking if anything historically.
We've
So-
been fortunate so far.
Okay, thanks.
Also, we are self-insured on a lot of our insurances, and so self-insurance is no insurance, which means that you cover it. Now, there are some cases where we have reinsurance and some other things, but we are more vulnerable due to that. But we've saved a whole lot of money going that route. But that is a risk that we need to be prepared to handle.
And it does give you, as a board, flexibility as well.
Right.
Like Commissioner Osterreich said, to use it here or to use it there during the year if something does come up. You have your contingency within the general fund, but this is your contingency outside of the general fund, so good.
Okay, 5-year plans. We have so many different what-ifs that it took 4 scenarios to try to encompass a lot of the big things. And so this is, I want to reiterate, this is a plan. There's nothing in stone. If you'll notice, when you look at them, the first column is in gray. That is this year's budget. And so that's the only thing that's in stone. And of course, we know we can make budget amendments and change that. But that's what the current adopted budget is. Everything past that is a plan, is some thought processes to give you some information on what things might look like. I think from the budget calendar we talked about earlier, the department budget request and the outside agency request have not come in yet. So we don't have anything from any of those folks about what they think they need for the coming year. So that's a big caveat I wanted to note up front. When you're doing a 5-year plan, obviously the closer in, the more accurate you can be. So 15 has been where we focused most of our energy, because I think you can go out that far. But when you get into 16 through 19, you've got increasing unknowns, and they're going to be less accurate than 15 is. We are doing some things to improve our accuracy with our human services budgeting. For the first time, we're going to use the state template, which basically you put in all of your inputs, if you will, all of your staff and your estimates of how they're going to be working, what they're going to do. And then it will project for you the kinds of revenues you can expect based on the federal and state funding formulas. So we're hoping to improve our budgeting on human services. And there again, that sales tax, which we tend to closely monitor. So those are some things to look for. Let's see, I've talked about that. Contingencies. In these scenarios, we've removed all except $400,000 in the general fund budget. And there again, we're relying on that $5 million in the assigned fund balance. We have assumed no expansion for fiscal 15, with the exception of the Midland Library additions, the EMS station at Concord Mills. In plans B, C, and D, there's a 1.5% COLA for the schools. Their increased school maintenance in Plan A, because we do recognize there's a lot of maintenance issues with the schools as well. And if you will recall, in our budget process last year, you gave the Cabarrus Health Alliance a little over $600,000, with the understanding that $300,000 of that was one-time money. So in every plan, we've pulled back our $300,000.
And on the 1.5% for COLAs, it's not in plan, it's A, B, and D.
Okay.
B and D.
B and
Oh, excuse me, B and D.
B
Sorry,
and D.
not C.
That's correct. B and D. I had noticed it on here. That is correct. Okay. All right. In the 5-year plan, the new debt, and some plans have it, some plans don't. We have an option, obviously, of issuing debt. In plans A and B, we assumed up to a maximum of $90.8 million. I believe Plan D has $5 million, but it doesn't say whether, we're not getting into the details of what kind of debt each of those would be.
And that's up to $50 million, not 5.
5 million in debt service, excuse me. 5 million is the debt service that you're going to see on the plan, which would equate to borrowing 50 million. I'm sorry, thank you for that correction, yes. Because what we budget is the payments, and so the payments on 50 million are roughly 5 million. So, of course, that would be dependent on a referendum being adding and passing, and these plans assume any payments would begin in fiscal 17, which starts July 1 of 16.
Let me, and again, we're getting ready to go into the 5-year plans. Again, as Ann said, these are only plans, these are only scenarios for you as a board to consider. This is the beginning of the process. As Ann said, we've not even sat down with the or with our department heads, other than to tell them they are, like I said, budget, actually, Ann showed it from today forward for you guys, but for staff, it started back in November. And then on the general fund, it started in December. So we gave them the direction flat. If you're adding anything, you need to find a new revenue to go with it. If you don't have a new revenue, it's flat for now. So that's what we're expecting to see. So that's the only direction we've given the staff, but we've not even seen that yet. So I just want to give you a little bit of background there. And again, A is one scenario, B is one, C is one, and D. They're all different options. And what it's going to give you is, okay, if we put something here, this is what the bottom line is going to look like. If we put something over here but not here, this is what the bottom line is going to look like. And same thing, not just the bottom line, but then at the bottom, the tax rate, and what it does to the tax rate and what it would require. And if you plug in different things than what we have in there, it may have the potential to affect that tax rate one way or the other. So I just want to make sure everybody understands these are not recommendations. These are scenarios for you to consider, and putting in items that you've talked about in the past, that you may have agreed with the past, or their current policies within your ordinances, whether it's a personnel ordinance or whatever. Those are your policies that are in place. We haven't got to it. Ann's going to start going down through there, but I want some of them, such as a COLA, such as a merit increases. That is your policy, that it happens every year based on these criteria. However, every year at your retreat is when we get direction from you. So that's only a matter of from the day forward, it stays or it doesn't stay. Okay, so that's why they're in there. That's why it's supposed to be in there, because that's policy. You waive the policy. You give us directions to make those changes. So, okay, thanks.
All righty. Okay, let's look at scenario A. In scenario A, let's just start with I've used the growth or decline in the tax base, the numbers given to me from Brent. And so 15 starts with the 2.4% increase over the last year. And then, of course, it's in categories of real, personal, and public service. And I believe real's going forward with the assumption of a 2% growth a year, public service 1%, and personal property 2%. And then the year of the reval, which for us is fiscal year 17, we have assumed a 6% increase, which is over the 2% increase. So you'll see a $6.7 million increase in 17 in revenues due to the reval as it looks right now. You'll see that in 15, I've added $470,000 as a result of increased collection rate from the DMV due to those changes. The sales taxes, we've used the 2.25% over this year's. And so when we did the budget last year for 2014, we increased it $3.3 million. Now that included the correction of the annualizing, that one thing, and then where we actually were. And that's why the 15 number is a lot less than the 14 number. You're just looking at the growth. And the growth we estimated was 2.25%, and that's carried on through the 5 years. And then the quarter-cent sales tax, I assumed it went exactly the same as the other sales taxes. The ambulance fees, what rate did we use on those, Parth? The ambulance fee revenues, what rate did we use on those to increase them? 2.5, and building inspection was 5, and register of deeds was 7?
For this coming year? For 15?
Yeah, for 15.
For 15 ambulances, 2. Building inspection, 5, and register of deeds, I think, was 15.
Okay. And then after that, I've got the numbers to give you on those. Then you see the lottery proceeds. Now, look at that second section, one-time revenue sources. If you look in 2014, of course, we had the one-time DMV money. But when we budgeted that, we knew, and we just had one-time things related to that. But the COPS proceeds of almost 2.7 million and the lottery proceeds of almost 5 million, those were funds that we had been stored up that we could use to apply towards the debt service. We do not have that in any of the other years of the plan, except for the 2.2 million in lottery. So that's a significant loss of revenue available to us. So in Plan A, we would estimate the revenues at 210,859,000. Now let's look at the expenses. The only additional personnel we have in there, the 166,594, that's the estimate for adding the Midland Library and the EMS co-station at Concord Mills. The next item was the increases in health insurance, which I talked about earlier, which primarily relate to the Affordable Care Act fees of $210,000. After that, I used a 7% inflation factor for health care to increase our cost over the years. And that's further out, so we'll have more time to analyze that to see if that's correct. But as you all know, the inflation rate for health care is much higher than it is for other things. Then we have the merits and COLA, which is $1,299,000, which we talked about. I believe the COLA was $755 and the merits $544 to create that. Then the operations, the only thing in that $343,000 relates to the Midland Library and the EMS co-station. There's nothing else there. I added a little bit extra in 16 in Plan A, where you see it going up to 917, because when we've been as frugal as we've been, well, I'm sure there'll be some needs there that we need to meet. The retirement of debt is right off the amortization schedule on the loans in terms of what those will be reduced by. And then you'll notice in fiscal 16 is when we have to make our payment on the Q-scabs. That's when our Q-scabs principal starts. That's what that $1,330,000 is. The next line is talking about debt service for capital needs. Now in Plan A, just to give you a scenario, if you were to borrow $90.8 million, and if the interest rate at the time were 2% above what it were last May, when we did our last offering, the debt service payments would be $8.9 million. And that would hit in 17. So that gives you an idea of what it costs when you borrow. The next line is discussing the Economic Development Incentives grants. That's just carried forward from last year over what's due which year, and those are estimates. The TIF obligation to Kannapolis, that's based on that amortization schedule there for the maximum it could be. Then in Plan A, you'll notice that there is $1,650,000, and that would be if you chose to give them money for maintenance. We've talked a whole lot about maintenance needs. And in this calculation, that would give CCS.
Them would be schools.
I'm sorry, them would be schools. I'm sorry. Would be to give the schools, and it would be CCS, $1,500,000, and roughly $150,000 for Kannapolis. Remember, any time that you do something that reflects the current expense, you have to make sure you have equality between the two systems. And so when you give to one, you have to give the proportionate amount to the other. The next item there in brown refers to new school operational cost. So I know there has been quite a bit of discussion of paying cash for a current school. Well, if you do that, then when you open the school, there will be costs to staff the school. And that's what that $1,363,000 is for in 2016. The next item is what we discussed about the CHA decreasing $300,000 per that agreement. Although I feel sure when they come before you, they're gonna want some money, want some funding. We'll see, maybe not. Then 2 items down, you'll see cuts in expenses to balance. What I did.
Wait a minute, I'm sorry. Let me just interject on that, because I don't know, just to refresh when you said that about the Health Alliance. They were expecting to get, they do the work and they get paid in arrears after they've done it. They were a year late, and the state changed funding and said, oh, we owe you $1 million, but you're not getting it now. So their budget was greatly impacted like that, with no way for them to plan, and they'd already done the services. And so we did agree to help them out last year. So I don't want to minimize that they were put in a bad situation and that we were in a position to help them. I have no idea where they are this year. I don't know if it's the same old where they've been, and you're on their board now, so I don't know if you know anything, if they're the same old or whatever. But when we get in the budget process, we will find out, has the state changed something for them again? Is it better? Is it worse? I don't know, but I didn't want to, I think that's important for anybody that's listening to this, to know that that's what happened a year ago, or last May. Well, I guess it wasn't May, because we made a change, but I don't remember the month, but, you know.
It was very late in the
It
process.
was very late in the
you're right.
process, and they were getting hit hard, and we only helped some. So I just want to point that out. That,
Right, right.
which was the right thing to do at the time to help them out, because they had already done all the work and just aren't getting paid for it, so.
Right. And
I'm sorry for interrupting you,
No,
but I
that's
wanted to say
okay.
that.
But as I recall, as he was before you, he had just found out that he had a big cut that he'd had no way to plan for. And so you acknowledged your ability and willingness to help, but you did make it clear that it was a one-time thing. And so that's why I've
Yep. No,
got
I
that
agree
on
that
here.
the way you have it depicted here is correct. But I just want to say that when they come back, we'll find out what happened during the rest of the
Right.
year. Did they get more money than they were expecting to get? Did they get cut again somewhere else?
Right.
Whatever their details are. And I have no knowledge at this time as to how they're going to come back and what they're going to ask for, but that's why I just wanted to do a little clarification, so.
Yeah, nor do I. I just know that healthcare has been in such flux that I can only imagine that they have had a lot of things happening both ways, probably. The next item, it says cuts in expenses to balance. In all of these plans, I wanted to make sure that every year balanced, and so if things went good, and you'll see at the bottom the color coding, I colored it green. Green means good. Green in that line at the bottom, revenue over expenditures. If they were positive, I didn't need to do anything up above. But you'll notice on Plan A in fiscal 16, we would need to make cuts of $109,000 somewhere in order for us to break even. And so when you see a red up in the body on that line, that means that we would need some cuts to break even. Otherwise, you would see it go green, so to speak, on that bottom line. In all of these plans, you're going to see the decrease in the contingency. You know, right now it's got $1.2 million in it. We are reducing that by $800,000 to be only $400,000 on an ongoing basis. So that comes out. Then we've got our capital improvement funds that we give the schools on RCC annually. That's $1,220,000. So Plan A balances the budget at a $210 million level with $127,000 to spare. And what that would create was, I'm also trying to track what it does with our fund balance and what it does with our debt service, to help you keep that in front of you as well.
So, and on Plan A, it shows that our debt as a percentage of our current budget goes from potentially 19.72% next year, up 2.5% to 22.04%.
That's correct. That's correct.
For the 1 year. And then
For the 1
starts
year.
coming back down as the other debt falls off.
And I guess at the end of 5 years, it's still higher than it is right now.
Currently, it's 20.26.
So it would go to
Current year.
20.39 on here.
Yes, yes, sir. Point 10, yeah. Right.
Any other questions on Plan A? All right.
And, wait a minute, just to clarify, the reason it would go up in 2017 would be
That's the year we
if
would.
there was a bond referendum that passed, and the bond referendum amount that you have calculated in here is a $90 million bond.
90.8.
Right.
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure I was reading it correctly, too. So that's how you've planned that in the event there was a bond of 90 million, it would hit in 2017's budget. Okay.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, I think the plan had been to try to, if we were doing something of that nature, to try to do it, say, in the March timeframe of that year, so the first payment would come due after July 1 and put it in the next fiscal year. And that way, you would, have the oomph from the reval to help make sure we had plenty of money to do that.
Can I ask you one more question about, and it's actually, I guess, plans A, B, and D. I think it's been the position of staff and some of the commissioners at least, that if there was a rise in your tax bill, that was a tax increase. And that was the reason for the statement that 2012 was not a tax increase. So these plans have I think Brent said, a 6 to 7% rise in property value, which means your property tax bill is going to go up 6 to 7%. So that's reflected in 2017 change resulting from revaluation. So under the staff definition, that is a tax increase that we are planning for in 2017 on plans A, B, and D, correct?
It might
is-
not be.
That is to keep the tax rate
Right.
flat, which would increase with the value, and so does C as well.
But it might
C
not
does as
be.
well.
Right, so you're right about C. So on plans A, B, and D, if you look down in the green part, revenues over under expenditures, our surplus in 2017 is 2.506 million, which means we need that tax increase in order to balance this budget. Otherwise, we come up with a 4.5 million dollar deficit. Is that right?
Okay, let me also say that it doesn't mean that every piece of property will go up 6 to 7%, because what we would hope will happen is that someone will go into Philip Morris.
Sure.
What we hope would happen is that there's more construction going on, and therefore the value of property in the county goes up, not necessarily because my house goes up in its valuation, but because there's more investment in the county, which then raises the overall amount. So I don't want to,
Well, I think
I
as
don't want
Brent went
people to
through
think
this-
that it's immediately that my tax bill's going to go up 6 to 7%. That's not what's been said.
I think as Brent went through this, he was saying that we would have appreciation in our property values of 6 to 7%. And so if Philip Morris came, it would be in addition to that, not as an exclusion to this.
I think
It
that,
would-
I,
Yeah,
go
that's
ahead. I
correct.
think
And
it
it
would
would be
be-
an average.
Yeah.
Some are up, some are down, some may be more than 6%, some may be 0.
Right. So my only point is on plans A, B, and D, we have to have that tax increase in order to balance these plans. And if we don't have that tax increase, we are going to be $4.5 million deficit. Because we have a $2.5 million surplus, and if you take 6.7 and subtract that away from 2.5, we're going to get negative 4.5, right?
Yeah.
Because Plan C, we have a $13 million surplus in 2017. So if you take away that tax increase, you still have $7 million surplus. So that's the only plan that balances without a tax increase.
let's get through A, B, and
Yeah, let's get through
to
it, because
So
there's other matters that
there's other things that
contribute to
change it.
so.
And on Plan A, that assumes a $90.8 million bond include. The proposal from the school system regarding salary increases is not included in A,
You're going to see that in B.
not in A. And then the increases for county employees as per the policy are included. The
Yes.
COLAs and merits in both of them, A
Yes.
and B.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I tried to put what our current policy is. Ready to go to B? All right. In Plan B, the revenues are the same. I haven't done anything with revenues. Where you're going to see some changes is an assumption of, well, what if we do this? And I tried to highlight them to make them easy to find. In Plan B in 2015, if we gave the increases to the schools of the 1.5%, which we discussed earlier of how much that would break down between CCS and KCS, that'd be $3.3 million. Plan B, the debt is still there in fiscal 17 of the $8.9 million in the debt service. We have the assumption that the new school would be open and cost the $1,363,000 in new operational costs, the same as we had in A. The Health Alliance is the same. Now, in order to do that, we went red. There's $1,545,000 in cuts we would need to make to the 15 budget in order to break even. And then in fiscal 16, there's $237,000 we would have to make in order to break even. And then you will notice we go green. And then we so this is just showing you what if that were what you selected.
Now, this takes away what you added for maintenance.
Yes,
in
it
A.
does. Yes, it does. So if you added the maintenance, it would be $1,650,000 more in what was in the red. But hopefully by putting them on separate ones, it would give you an idea of if we did this, if you do them both, you add that. Any questions on B?
But if we did both, what you're saying is that instead of a $1.5 million cut, we'd have a little over a $3 million cut. We
Yes.
would have to do the budget.
Over
In order to do
$3.1
both, more money in maintenance and the increase in salaries for the schools, it would take us cutting the county's budget $3.1 million,
Yes.
$3.2 million.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I just want to make sure my math
Yes,
was
ma'am.
doing right too then. Thank you.
All right, Plan C. Plan C involves a tax cut of 3.5 cents. It involves not issuing new debt. It takes out salary increases for the county and the school personnel. It adds $7 million in fiscal 15 to a capital reserve to be used for the schools. And then in the succeeding years, it adds the debt service. So as we're rolling off those reductions in debt, you're adding that to the capital reserve. You'll notice what that does, the effect of that is in the terms of revenues in fiscal 15, the 3.5 cents would reduce revenues $6.5 million. On the expense side, we would still need to cut programs $10.46 million in order to balance. Next year. And then it goes green.
And to point out, did you mention the $7 million?
Yes.
Okay.
The $7 million, and that's in the purple. You're going to see something in purple later on in Plan D. So in this plan, $7 million is going into the capital reserve in 15, $8 million in 16, 9.5 in 17, 10.9 in 18, and 12.9 in 19. So that is designed to build the capital reserve for pay-as-you-go funding. Like I say, though, getting past that.
But in order to get there, to get the 7 million, you have to cut almost 10.5 to get the 7. So if the 7 didn't go in there, we'd still need to cut 3.5 in order to make it balance.
Right.
Okay. I just want to make sure I'm matching the numbers up right.
Yes, and you would need to waive your policies on COLAs and merits and things like that, because that's in addition to that. Any other comments on C? All right, let's go to D.
Well, I have just one quick comment. I guess I'll talk about all the plans when Ann's done, but this was the Plan C was based on the plan that I had brought to the board, and so they had asked me about I basically wanted to present this as the plan as presented. At that time, we hadn't got anything from the school board in terms of a salary increase or things like that, and so the plan, you'll see, you can build those things back in. It's not my intent to not have those things. Just I wanted to present this as a baseline plan, and then we could add those things in as we determined. So we can talk more about them substantively, but I just wanted to make sure that people were aware that that's not a policy decision not to have those things.
But if you add that back in, though, then that 10.5 goes up to 12. I mean, if everything else stayed the same.
Well, the
So, I
thing
mean,
about
there's
it was,
some changing that
we
would
have
go.
to decide as a group what those numbers are going to be, and so the assumptions in terms of what they were going to be, I just didn't feel like that they were tremendous assumptions. Not that staff didn't do the great job on those assumptions. That was what was proposed before us, but I do feel like there will be some modification of those things, so I'd rather build it back in than have those assumptions to start with.
No, I understand. I was just making sure that I got that right, that if any of those were built back in, then that generic cut that would have to be made, because it's not identified, would also increase.
Right.
Okay. I just want to make sure my math was going in the right direction to look at this.
Are we good? All right, let's go to D. All right, now D, the assumptions that change in D is that in fiscal excuse me, I think you were going to present this. You sure?
Just with some qualifiers on that, is that this would assume that the board chooses to build a school this next year with cash. So therefore, it would include opening the school. It would also allow for, it's sort of a hybrid between A and B, and then the all pay-as-you-go, completely pay-as-you-go. And then it would also allow for an increase in some additional school maintenance potentially, so that we can bump that annual contribution to them so that they can bite off more of those backlog maintenance projects as well. And then ultimately, it would require, and Pam and I already have met with Dr. Shepard and Kelly Klutz, to a more detailed plan of their construction needs so that we can make it fit, the cash and their construction plan fit together and come to an agreement. So what we did, and then thinking that their needs were great up front right now, in order to do that, there may be a need for a smaller bond, so sort of bridge the cash, a smaller bond, and then go with pay-as-you-go, sort of what Commissioner Oathrigh's proposing. So that's it. Those were sort of the qualifiers, and you can talk about it now, but I just want to make sure that it's going to depend on some others, and we won't know. The schools are working on that more detailed sort of emergent, okay, if you build an elementary school or whatever that first school is that you choose to build, when is the absolute next time you've got to have a school or schools? And that may be, if there's not enough cash available at that time, instead of having to wait, maybe potentially have to wait a year, 2, 3 years, we do a smaller bond, get those emergent needs out of the way, and then move to the pay-as-you-go. And so it's a hybrid of the others. So go ahead.
Hopefully that will give you an idea of what debt service becomes when you borrow money. So roughly it's like if you borrow $50 million, it's going to cost $5 million. So it gives you an idea of how that goes. Also, if we go in lower amounts, there are more financing options open to us in terms of like installment financing or other financings that may not cost as much to issue. It costs a lot of money to issue bonds. And so there may be some other options that would cost less money if we were borrowing lesser amounts. But there again, Plan D does have, assuming $50 million in debt in fiscal 17, which would add to the debt $5 million in debt service cost. And it does have the increase for the schools in there. It does have the opening of the new schools, like Mike just mentioned. And we go red, $1.5 million in 15 to 37 in 16. Then you'll notice at the bottom, there's purple again, where we've got capital reserve addition for schools and for the county of $6.4 million in 17, $10 million in 18, and $12.9 million in 19. Of course, that assumes a flat tax rate all the way through. And, like we talked about, the closer in you get, the more you might, the further out you go, the harder it is to estimate, and of course, a lot more opportunity for changes. Any questions on D? Well, hopefully this has highlighted, a lot of the very difficult decisions before you in terms of school needs in both maintenance and the issues that they've had without receiving pay increases from the state for so long. The struggle that we all have with stewardship of tax dollars, trying to get the biggest bang for the buck, and always having more needs than dollars. And so hopefully this will give you an idea of the financial impact of various choices. And obviously, we will be tailoring these based on your decisions over the next few months to come up with our real plan when we go through the budget process.
Mark, are we going to talk about these 4 options afterwards, or would you prefer to talk about it now?
Yep, we got what's the
Well-
schedule?
Yeah, we're a little bit behind schedule. We can
Yeah.
move the community service to the end if you want to.
Yeah, let's do that
Kasha's Kasha has to stay with us all day, so we can move her,
Before we.
further down. We also have, 2:45 to 4 o'clock board discussion direction for the budget, so we can also do a lot of it there too if we want, depending on how everybody wants to go. So that would be my other comments.
Whatever the preferences of people, that's why I was asking Mike. I thought there was another spot.
The reason I said that is that I might want to look at these a little bit closer. Pam was kind enough to get us one-page copies real quick versus flipping through this one, and so I can see it a little bit better than I could. Chris, you wanted to say something?
No, I was just going to say, I think if we do have any discussion, it could be light, and then this afternoon after the discussions and decisions with the school system, then we can really hammer these out, because
We're going to make Ann stay all day with us too, aren't we?
I'll be here, gang.
Is there anything really pressing that you want to talk about right now, or anything that maybe, I just want to say like Ann or Parth could, or Mike or Pam could pull when we take our lunch break or something? I don't know.
I mean, I have probably 2 minutes worth of comments with respect to Plan C and what I see the benefits are, and I can say those now and you can think about them, or we can talk about them all this afternoon, whatever people's preference is. I don't care.
Okay. I don't have a preference. If you want to 2 minutes, and then we'll keep on going.
Okay, that'll be fine. Well, I would say as Plan C, the major benefits I see of Plan C are, as I mentioned, a tax increase in 2017 is not required to balance it. Plan C, if you look down at capital reserve additions for schools, you have about $50 million through there. If you put that with $45 million, you have $40 million there. If you put it with $45 million, you get $85 million of cash for schools in the first 5 years. You have really starting in 2016 surpluses, and one of the things that I had talked about in terms of the benefits of this plan is it gives us a lot of flexibility with respect to teacher pay and things like that. So you start looking at 2016 and you do have surpluses immediately. There is major debt reduction in this plan. In addition to creating $90 million for capital reserves, by the time we finish this 5 years, we will have paid down $239 million of our debt. So our total debt as a county will be down 50% in 5 years, and we've had $90 million for capital for the schools, and we've had a tax rate decrease. And as I mentioned, my plan was basically to assume no COLA or merit pay increases for county staff for this year. That does not apply for the years following, and it also does not apply for the school system. And for plans A, B, and D, I mean, essentially what those plans identify is a tax rate increase for people in 2012 and a tax value increase in 2017. So between our two valuations, they're getting really a double whammy. And if you think about what your tax bill is, that'll have a lot to do with it. So those are my only comments.
Do you want me to rebut now, or do you
Well,
want me to, or we can wait? I don't.
Let's
either way.
wait. My only comment's going to be, there's $10.5 million of unidentified cuts in next year's budget, and that's a lot of money that's not identified, and somebody's going to feel pain for $10.5 million in cuts.
Well, I did identify several $1 million in my presentation that I gave in December. So they're not unidentified, they're just not included
But
here.
not 10.5.
Several million.
Several million, not 10.5. I'm just saying, there's some drastic cuts in order to make that happen. That's my pain with this plan. I think the idea of not borrowing excessive amounts of money, finding ways to continue to pay cash for projects, is exactly what we should be looking at. I just don't think we need to cut our nose off to spite our face in the first year in order to get there. That's my thing. But we'll talk more afterwards. Anybody else, real quick? Okay. Do we want to do the community survey real quick?
Sure.
Because we're scheduled to do lunch at roughly 11:30, so Kasha, I don't mean to make you rush. And that means we'll just miss one of the breaks, but we'll make it up during lunch. You had 30 minutes down? You got 15.
I can do it. I'm flexible.
I have confidence in you.
Thank you. All right. We are here to discuss the community survey, which will be taking place over the next few months. And I hope you are as excited as I am to do this. This is a great opportunity to get feedback from our constituents and see what priorities they have, and also see which services they are least satisfied with. Our survey was last conducted in the fall of 2010, and it was removed from the FY13 budget when we made those cuts, and it was added back this year. We have contracted with ETC Institute, which did our last survey, and it was basically because their methodology was better than other companies we had researched. The timeline was adjusted to better match the budget process. When it takes place in the fall, there's a gap between what happens, what we receive in the survey, and how that impacts our budget decisions. So in moving it to the spring, we're able to integrate it with your process and involve the public's opinion in these very important decisions we're making. So as you can see the timeline, we are looking to finalize the survey at the beginning of February, and then move on and conduct the survey through February and bring you a final report in April. Now, when they come in April, they'll have all kinds of charts and break down the information into various segments. And in the past, the board was involved with a survey at the end. You received a final report, but again, this is a good way to bring you into the process and involve you in what we want to know from our residents. Okay, the survey process. The survey will be mailed to 1,200 residents in the county. We're going to work to make sure that the percentage of folks that live in the incorporated versus unincorporated matches census information, so we get an accurate representation of that. The folks will be followed up with by a phone call. If they have a cell phone, it will be done there. If they have a landline, it will be done through that. If they have no phone, then we're going to rely on the mailed surveys. They can do the survey by mail or conduct it over the phone when they receive the phone call, and there has been no statistical significance in the response received via phone versus mail. So, all right. Survey development, a representative sample, of course, of our knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs of our residents, making sure that the points are not directly observable. So we're going to be able to determine if the services and facilities we provide meet the needs of residents or are helpful to them. We'll be able to evaluate programs, how the county carries out our functions, the effectiveness, our services, the actions taken, and our status. We'll be able to benchmark how the county does against itself and how we relate to other communities in the country. And of course, we'll be able to learn what's important to our residents and allow them to compare the various options. And the survey, the design of the survey is rather consistent to what we had in the past in order to be able to track long-term results. So you don't want to mix it up too much and then you have no way to see how far we've come or where we need to improve. Thank you. The survey includes 42 questions. This year, we're going to discuss an overall rating of general services, not the department, but the overall work of the county, library services, election services, communications, and we've expanded this section of the survey a great deal this year. Rather than just asking them if they get the newsletter, I want to know what kind of impact our communications are making on residents. Is it impacting them in a way where they want to make decisions or become more involved? What are they doing with the information, and are they engaged in local government? And if not, when are they engaged? Is it when there's a special emergency situation, and are we providing those services well? Public transportation, active living and parks, that's been expanded a little bit this year to focus on the senior centers and senior services. Emergency services was expanded a little this year to break down. It used to be grouped together, kind of general response to emergencies, and this year we're going to break it down into the various specific departments and as well the 911 center. Customer service, as always, community issues, and that's a general look at what folks would like to rank as far as priority and how they receive services, and then of course your general demographics of the community that responds to the survey. And next steps. We're going to determine the need for additional topics. We're bringing it to you today so you can look it over. Again, we can't make any drastic changes because we want to make sure there's consistency, but we want to make you part of this process and make sure you get the information you need to make great budget decisions. We'll deliver our draft to the ETC Institute for review, and we'll sign off on a final survey, and then we'll move forward with administering the survey. And as mentioned, this is very important in developing the budget process, and the survey just increases in value when we have an endpoint like this. It'll also help finance as they deliver performance measure goals and help departments be able to track information. And so we think there's going to be a lot of value to moving it to this new timeline. And I hope this has been a very quick introduction, but I hope it's been helpful. And if you want to take a look at the survey, we can go through that now and see if there's anything you'd like to discuss or add or change up a little bit. So has anyone had a chance to look over the survey, or shall we just go through it a little bit?
I looked through the survey last night, Kasha, and one of the things that concerns me about the survey, in different budget discussions with the county manager, it's brought up that people would like to have more parks or something like this. One of the things that's frustrating to me about the survey is that it asks people only about the benefit and doesn't ask them about the cost. So we're not asking them, would you like to have more parks if it causes you to raise your taxes, or would you like to have more parks if we have to borrow money to do that? You just ask somebody, would you like to have more parks? And in a vacuum, of course, they'll say yes. If you ask me, would I like to have a Ferrari? I would. Would I like to go to work and work 80 hours a week for the next 2 years to afford that? I would not. So we ask about all the benefit, and we don't ask about any of the cost, and I think that we're going to get a skewed result in terms of what people are looking for out of their government if we don't ask about cost.
And one thing we can do, again, on the flip side of that, if you ask specifically about a tax rate or a tax increase, then of course nobody says, yes, I want my taxes to go up. So I think it would be finding a balance between how would you rate the level of service you receive in regard to the level of tax that it costs to administer such a practice. Is that along the lines?
I mean, I think if you acknowledge that people would not want these things, if it requires them to pay more taxes, I think implicitly we're saying that their answers that they give are not very relevant answers.
Thank you.
I'm trying to find a general overall question. I mean, I think you've got legitimate questions there. So how do we craft a couple of questions at each category, or do we do an overall question? Is it just generalized government services, or are you happy with what you're getting for the amount of money you're paying? Or, as you said, do you want another library with the understanding that it's going to cost more money to build a library? Or if you want more parks, there could be a potential impact to the budget or whatever. So let us play with that.
Yeah, and maybe one general question is, which of these services would you be willing to incur a tax rate to have? Or which of these services would you be willing to incur additional debt in order to obtain those services? And have people identify which of those services they would be willing to do those things.
Yeah,
But you can work on it.
Yeah, let us come up with a couple of questions, and we'll let you guys vet them and see which one you guys, as a board, feel comfortable with, and maybe we can add one or two questions.
Certainly.
Because we want to make sure, that truly, we're not just doing a survey to do a survey.
Yeah.
We want to make sure it's valuable information that mostly you can use, and then we can use as well. So, but yeah, if it's not going to give you what you need, then there's really no need to do it. So, again, we're not just fishing for positive answers. We want answers, and whatever that is. So.
And what is the cost of this survey?
The survey cost is $19,250, and actually, the price typically goes up 5% over 3 years, but we were able to talk them down in price from the last time it was administered. Mhm. At 1,200 random sample.
And that's something practice for several years now. It's every other year we've been doing these surveys. So I think, in fact, last year we may have extended that. We didn't do it last year.
It was taken out of last year's
taken out of
budget.
last
It was
year's.
put back this year.
Right.
It would typically be administered in the fall, and we wanted to make it a part of this budget process for this reason.
Before we move forward with that, I do want to look at it. I'll be honest with you, I haven't had a chance to look at it and read through each of the questions.
Please
so
do.
I do want to do that. I mean, we just got this yesterday, so I didn't have time to
We
read
have
all
until the
this last
7th
night.
to
Yeah.
submit our final draft in order to stay on this schedule. So
Right.
it's absolutely with the opportunity to look over it.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
We can actually add that discussion to your work session in February. And that way, that'll give you plenty of time to read through it. In the meantime, we'll get some sample questions to you to review as well, and then we'll sort of bring it back and have an overall group discussion at the work session. How about that? Is that good?
One of the specific questions that I had a concern about was public transportation 26 and 27. I think question 26 describes broadly what our CCTS does. And 27, I think, is just a little bit misleading, because then it says, how important do you think it is for the county to provide park and ride services such as CCTS? And I don't know that question 27 adequately describes the breadth of what CCTS does. And so I think we're going to get not a very good answer with respect to CCTS services in terms of how important those are, because it just says park and ride services, and that's really not a big part of what CCTS is, park and ride services. Yeah. I didn't think we did. I knew it wasn't a very big part, but I didn't think we did.
Yeah.
Some of the links, or not the links, the JARC, they're designated stops. How they get to the stop, I don't know, but you would think if they were driving to the stop, they could drive to work, but I'm not quite sure what that is, so we'll see. Yeah, the cities have that, and I don't know if we were trying to respond to that.
This is loosely based on the last survey, so it kind of matches that, but it focused on CCTS rather than
Okay.
length.
They just got new buses too, didn't they?
The city?
Yeah.
I believe they did get some, were they hybrids or, yeah?
67, but not 11.
Yeah, but that's not us.
I know it's not.
I know. Everybody blames us for the buses,
said
and
the
the buses,
city.
I know, the bus, I just wanted to highlight, again, agree with you 100%, that is not us.
They could probably
We get
use
blamed
both
for 'em.
lanes, run more people in their haul.
But if it's okay with you as a board, if you'll review this, send your suggestions to Kasha, then we can respond to those and then have them back for the work session.
One of the places I think we might be able to include some of these general ideas is question 35, where we use a 5-point scale to rank community issues. I think we could add a few letters there and put expenditure control, debt control, and tax rate control on there, and that might be the spot to put those things.
Okay, those will be tricky. So if you just say debt control, that's one thing, but if you say debt control for a particular use or a particular service, that would be another. So shoot us some options that you think, and same thing, and we'll play with it and try to craft it.
Okay, it's just after 11:30, so you've done great, gotten us back on schedule.
I'm sorry I ran through that so quickly, but
You're fine, you're fine. If you have any questions that you want to ask during the break, that's great. We're going to break for about an hour, start back up about 12:30. Lunch is in the process of being put out there. I don't know if it's exactly ready or not, but if we'll go ahead and have lunch, and again, we're not to discuss, the 5 of us are not discussing business during the break because it's not part of the meeting, but obviously if you want to talk to anybody that's here with us, that's not an issue, but the 5 of us would not, or 3 of us should not be grouped together to discuss any business. How's that, to clarify? Thanks a bunch.